Former president of the Nigerian Bar Association, Agbakoba, has been speaking about what kind of president Nigerians should be looking to elect. I began the conversation, though, by asking if he thinks the politicians and the electorate are having the right conversations about the 2023 elections.
Oh, and that's because we don't have political parties. We just have people in parties, so-called, because that's the step or the gateway to power. So I would not call the parties that seemingly are the biggest two parties in the sense in which Macron emerged as president in France just the other day. So there are no issues. So what you see is, how can I get there? So there's an intense competition for resourcing power. And when that happens, and it is a widespread thing, then you don't have issues. That's on the one hand. But I think the more dangerous problem is hunger, unemployment, disease, and the emasculation of the voting population. So let's say 60 million people will vote. Are they going to vote on issues or on what they give them to do? So the politicians have realized that in spite of the Electoral Act, voting doesn't really mean anything. So they don't turn to the voters to appeal to them that if you vote me in, then I will do A, B, C. So if you discount the voters, then actually it's the politicians having a conversation, and the conversation will be narrow, which is how do we access power, either as a senator, House of Reps, governor, or president. That's why the quality of the debate we see is extremely poor. And you talk about zoning, micro-zoning, it's all about themselves. And how we can overcome the hurdle and make the voters enlightened is a matter of another 20, 30 years.
20, 30
It's not going to happen today, because there's a process of democracy. Democracy oscillates. So it's like there's a process of pregnancy. You can't get pregnant today and have a baby tomorrow. So you can't have democracy in 1999 and expect 20 years down the line to have, an enlightened democracy with enlightened media, enlightened civil society, enlightened traditional rulers, enlightened religious rulers or religious people. Those are the ones that drive the voting process. Look at what happened in America, the Me Too movement and all that. So, unfortunately, we've got a long way to go. And I would put Nigeria's democratic evolution at stage 2 or 3. But I like to call it illiberal. Either you call it semi-democratic or illiberal. In either of these two, the element of competitive voting isn't there. So there are no issues at all. There are no issues.
I know you say it will take 20 to 30 years, but what should we be doing?
Who is the we?
The electorate.
They can't do anything.
Nothing.
They're dispossessed. They can't do it. They're too hungry. When you talk about 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 to 60 million people on the register, I hope you know that in Lagos. They are scattered all over Nigeria. Now let's look at the typical person who is going to vote. He or she is probably unemployed, earns less than 5K a month, has no access to electricity or mobility, so he's easily enticable. Here is 1,000 naira. He's going to vote for who gives him that money. So the mistake is to assume that voting, the voting process, has an emancipated process. It doesn't. It's very poor people who are voting, and they can easily be bought. That's why, as you well know, unless you say you don't know, money plays a role. There are two key things that anybody who dares to want to run the Nigerian electoral process must possess. Money, structure. If you don't have these two key things, you're going nowhere. You could be the most brilliant person with the best ideas, and people will say, Kingsley Moghalu would have been a massive presidential candidate, because he said lots of things that I think resonates. Professor Patotomi, they're all there. But do they have the heft? Is the question. The heft is down at the structures. those who control the structures, make it happen.
I also know that you've been part of the third force, but despite the best efforts put by individuals, in this third force, it appears that they also have not.
It's not possible. Because as you come up, they stamp you down. They say, watch that guy coming. Stamp him down. So the third force really isn't about electoral power. I mean, if the third force were to win, that would be fantastic. But what I think the third force is pointing to where the future will lie. And to say, in spite of this going on, we will keep speaking. That drove me on March 28, 1998 to say, Abacha cannot say that he will take all 5 political parties. There has to be something said. So the third force makes sure that something is said, because some people may listen. But as to whether the third force can compete for money and structures, that is very, very unlikely.
Also an ongoing debate about a comment, I think, made by Chief Afe Babalola, that the 2023 elections should be put on hold until restructuring takes place. And there have been so much comments about that. What do you think?
No, it's wrong, because it will be unconstitutional. The Constitution, defective as it is our guiding framework. It does not recognize interim government. So I recognize what Chief Babalola is pointing to, which is exactly the problem I'm describing. If we all agree that the Constitution is flawed, and it's in democracy language we say the Constitution is centrifugal, so power lies at the center. So what we need is a centripetal process so that you can devolve power. Why aren't they doing it? I can't understand why the federal government doesn't understand that if it devolves matters relating to prisons, it will help it offload, because the federal government has little or no prisoners. Lagos State has the most number of prisoners. So why is it that the federal government can't really understand that devolution, restructure, there are so many names, but they all come to distribution of power is such a simple thing. So our first frustration is that is not happening quick enough. And so maybe we need to stop. Sometimes you say, this old car, I need to just stop and fix it. So Afe is saying, let's stop and fix it. That's a great idea, but it's unconstitutional. Because, okay, how do you stop it? The tenure of the president is 4 years. So where would you stop it? What instrument? It will amount to a civil coup d'etat. So I don't support it, but I understand it.
The recent Federal High Court judgment on 35% affirmative action for women, some people have described it as a big win. But then I'm looking at enforcement. Do you think it's going to really change the status of women?
No, it doesn't change anything. Because a judgment cannot give women power. In fact, to be honest with you, whenever I hear women talk about women empowerment, I then say, why is it that they're not organized? Because if women are more in number, it should be easy to get organized. And we've seen that across the world. The Me Too movement was an effective enabler for women. So the real challenge really is not whether there's a federal high court or state high court judgment, which is good. I mean, nothing wrong with that. But the main thing is, how do women empower their processes? We once had women in Nigeria. It was a very strong movement. We had the National Council for Women Societies. So all of these groups are now substantially weakened. So I'd like to see a return to those processes and times when you had very, very, very strong movement, which pushed women's issues, rather than say a judgment of the court is what empowers the women, the movement. Look, we're in a room of 20 people, and we're going to elect the class prefect, and there are 11 women and 9 men, and there's a woman running and a man running, and the man wins. Who do you blame? Who do you blame? So why is it that women, in spite of all the other tools that they could use, legislature, courts, why can't they be organized? That's the critical question. The woman in this election scenario I posed, why did she lose? Because there were 11 women. Why didn't those 11 women vote for her? So the man was able to manipulate the women to vote for him, and he won. We have 51.2% population, women. The voting population are here. I don't know what the current figures are, but it's substantial. If you add that to the youths, then it means that you have about 60% of the voting population, women and youths. Two big, massive constituencies that ought to dominate the electoral process. Well, we don't see that happening. So the question is why? Why do you need the courts? Why do you need a law when all you need to do is use your power in a strong way to get what you want? It's a dilemma for me.
With all of these issues that you've identified, that we've talked about, what kind of president should we be looking at?
Competent man in a suit. Not man in agbada, man in a suit. When I say suit, I don't mean the physical suit, but you can see a man who's ready to, who gets his hands dirty, is ready to lead. Because if you don't have a president who's ready to lead on all fronts, economy, everywhere, then we can't have a leader. So that's the sort of president, and I absolutely don't give a toss where the man comes from. Couldn't be impressed with all this zoning and micro-zoning. You know why? Because it is to their own interest, not ours. Okay, at the end of the day, after zone, micro-zone, and micro-zone, zone, does it make Nigeria better? If you, in fact, a study just came out which suggested that Nigerians are not interested in two things that we thought they would be most interested in. They're not interested in two guys from the same ethnic or religious group. It doesn't bother them. What bothers them is, can we get Nigerian politicians to take advantage of our huge natural resources to turn Nigeria around? Dubai just did 50. And somebody was saying, it's the vision of the leaders, and that's not a democratic society. So some are also asking, this democracy thing, what does it really mean? Those are questions, because democracy is not serving us well. So there's now some talk, in our huge human rights and democracy movement. China is not democratic, but it is pushing America. It is pushing America and about to overtake. So if these countries are not democratic, do we need to be? If we have been in the last 23 years and there's been no result. So you can see how far our problems are compounding. So I put it to you. If a person were told, this is a China-type leader, and here's what he will do in the next 20 years, and you see a movie of it, and here is a democratic leader, and here's what he will do in the next 20 years, and you see that the China-type leader is obviously better, who would you be choosing? The man on the street is suffering. Who cares? They tell us Nigerian economy grew by. How does it impact on this tin of sardine that is going up? That's the problem. So we need a president who can make that difference on the ground, not on statistics, paperwork. The budget is 30 trillion. Well, clap. But we see nothing. So we want to see a president who can deliver what Obasanjo famously titled the dividends of democracy. That is what we want to see and nothing else. We're tired of statistical budgets. Well, then they're taxing us in the meantime. Everything is now being taxed. So they're taking more money, and I'm not sure what we're seeing. So I wish Nigeria the best in 2023, but I don't see any great change.